The periodic table. In this video, we'll take a look at some of the characteristics of the periodic table. The periodic table is really a fundamental tool in chemistry. And if we look at it, and this is an example of one from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, we can see on here there are different parts to it. First of all, you have the groups. So if we look at each of these columns is a group. And then we have the periods that are going across this, so these horizontal rows. In each element, you can see the atomic number. So if you remember, the atomic number is the number of protons. And each element has a unique number of protons. So if I change the number of protons in an atom, it no longer is the same element. I can, however, change the number of electrons or change the number of neutrons, and it would not change the identity of the element. So if you took a little further, we can see here that the symbol, Ni, each element has a symbol. If you know some of the symbols, let's say for silver, Ag, it doesn't have the letters that correspond to the name. And that's because some of the symbols are related to the either Greek or Latin name of the element that it had originally. You'll also find that there's the element name for it. In addition, you'll see the atomic mass. Now you'll notice that the atomic mass is a whole number in fraction numbers, and that's because the number of the atomic mass is actually a weighted average of all the naturally occurring isotopes for that element. And again, I have the name, and then down here, we didn't talk about this in class, but this is the electron configuration. In other words, this is how the electrons are arranged around the nucleus of the atom. And we have that for each one of the elements. In addition, if you look at the columns in the periodic table, they have different names. So let's look at the first one, because the groups are also called families. And that's because if you look at each of the groups, they have very similar properties. So it's a group of one. Actually, hydrogen is an exception. But all the other elements in group one, they have similar characteristics. And they're called the alkali metals. They all have one valence electron. So if you remember, valence electrons are the number of outermost electrons. In group one, all the elements have one valence electron. They're very reactive, and they're metals. They have a very low electronegativity, so they don't hold on to their electrons, their valence electrons, very much. And when they combine with a nonmetal, you have an ionic bond that occurs. Now, group two are the alkaline earth metals, and all these elements in group two, they're metals, and they have two valence electrons. They're also very reactive as well. And when these metals, as well as other metals, bond with nonmetals, they form ionic bonds. So what you'll see with the group 1 elements, except for hydrogen, but lithium through francionium, beryllium through radium, when they bond with a non-metal, they'll form a positive ion. And the nonmetal will form a negative ion. Now, if we go to the other side of the periodic table, right, as a whole, all of these elements on this side are referred to as the main group elements. Group 18, these are the noble gases. These are very stable elements, and they have a full valence shell, so they have 8 valence electrons. They don't take part in chemical reactions readily. Group 17, These are the halogens, and they're very reactive. They have 7 valence electrons. They want one more. And then if you look at group 16, right, oxygen, sulfur, and selenium, these are the nonmetals. Group 15, nitrogen and phosphorus, these are the nonmetals. And you can see the metalloids. So they have varying characteristics that are similar to metals and nonmetals. Okay? And then if you look at the, let's look at the rest of the periodic table, you'll see a big group elements that are right in the middle of the periodic table. Right, these over here go all the way across. Groups 3 through 12. These are the transitional metals. Okay, and they're over here because of the way the valence electrons are filled. And they have, so, and also the number of valence electrons varies with these transitional metals. And we've seen that when you were naming elements. You saw, for instance, that iron, you find that there's more than one ions that are formed with iron. Copper is another one as well. So they have properties of metals. And again, when you have nonmetals, right? These nonmetals over here, from the main group elements, when they bond with the metals, they're going to form ionic bonds. If you have 2 or more nonmetals bonding together, you're going to find that those are covalent bonds that they form. Now, another thing we can find out from the periodic table is the number of valence electrons. And basically that's from the main group elements. So if we look at groups 1, 2, and then if we go over to 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18, the group number corresponds to how many valence electrons they have. So if you look at groups 1 and 2, group 1 has 1 valence electron, group 2 has 2 valence electrons. But if we go over to 13 through 18, if you subtract 10 from the group number, that's how many valence electrons it has. So for instance, group 13, if you subtract 10 from 13, it's 3. These elements have 3 valence electrons. Group 14, subtract 10 from that, it's 4. These have 4 valence electrons. Group 15, subtract 10 from that, you have 5. There's 5 valence electrons. Group 16, subtract 10 from that, and you have 6. So there's 6 valence electrons. And group 17, you subtract 10, that's 7. These has 7 valence electrons. And then group 18, these, you subtract 10 from that, it's 8. These have 8 valence electrons. And again, that's why the noble gases are very stable, because they have a full valence shell. Remember, when chemicals bond, when elements bond, they want to fill those valence electrons. They want to get 8. Okay, so you can tell an awful lot from the periodic table. This is just some of which you can learn from it. There are other things that we can learn, but this is the basics. All right, thank you.